my Swahili means that I'm fond of Tanzania because I can foster deeper relationships, but that also makes me then want to stay in Tanzania because that's a place where I feel like I can like nurture those kind of human connections. Universally, children learn well through play. They learn when they're enjoying because they're not stressed. They're curious. They're motivated. But what play looks like varies from child to child. So you cannot say that, like a team game is feels playful for all children. For a very shy child who's very anxious in those settings, like it actually might not feel really fun. So some of the
Yeah.
benefits, it doesn't mean it's not beneficial, but some of the benefits and what we describe as like play-based learning, that might not actually be what play looks like for that child. I think the key thing is that it cannot solve all of education's problems, all of a system's problems. And therefore, you need to be strategic about where you're using it and why you are using it. So you need to know what exactly is the problem that I'm trying to solve with EdTech. And the organization that I work for now, EdTech Hub, that's kind of at the center of what we do. We try to work with governments to generate and apply evidence on how technology can be used in their education systems for good.
Invisible Experts Podcast.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to this new episode of Invisible Experts Podcast. Today, I'm so happy to meet again, in this case virtually, my good friend, an old friend of mine, Hannah Simmons. How are you, Hannah? How's it going?
I'm very good. I'm very good, Andres. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. We have like a very s- let's say short conversation about our lives. We haven't seen and talked for maybe 8 or 9 years, perhaps, or maybe 10
Yeah.
years. And it's
Yeah, it's
great
been a
to see
long
you.
time.
I know. It's great to see you again. Hannah
Likewise.
is someone who I was very fortunate to meet because when I met her, she was such a young girl studying at university. But it's great seeing you growing up and do your stuff and actually like work in a way that I picture you working at because now you're working, you know, in a way in development,
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
immersed in another culture,
Yeah.
basically like being expert now in Swahili because when I met you, you learning Swahili. So if you don't
Exactly.
mind, Hannah, can you just perhaps contextualize, um, who you are, what you been up to, or what you're doing now?
Sure, sure. So, like you said, I think you met me when I was a little baby. No, when I was doing my undergrad degree in London, and we were working together. And back then, as you said, I was like learning Swahili. I was so excited about learning this new language and coming from a small part of Scotland where there's really no cultural diversity. Even being in London was really exciting for me. And so since then, and I suppose in retrospect, I think it's quite interesting because my undergraduate degree was African language and culture, which, to be honest, that's not a degree that you get and it takes you straight into a job. I can't think of any job application I've ever seen where that has been a requirement. But I was really keen to make use of it. And so I went to Tanzania. I had done a year abroad there. And as soon as I graduated, I just wanted to get back and improve my Swahili. And as you said, I always wanted to work in development, which I think is one of the things that I remember us talking about sort of in the middle of work. And yeah, I began volunteering at what was then a social enterprise, but has since become a nonprofit, Ubongo. and they make educational cartoons and radio shows with a real Afrocentric approach, which was something I really admired and loved getting to know the kind of human-centered design process. So I volunteered there, and then they gave me a job. And that was kind of a catalyst to me working in education in Tanzania. And so since then, I then did a master's in education and child development in the UK, but I really focused my research on education in Tanzania, and then worked for one of the donors, the Korean International Cooperation Agency, on an education project in Tanzania, and then have since kind of been, I say, growing my career in the kind of education, international development intersection. And yeah, I feel extremely fortunate to have the opportunities I've had, particularly to work in a part of the world that I absolutely love. But also, I suppose, in some small way, proud of myself for making good use of the money spent on my undergraduate degree, which I continue to pay off to this day.
Of course, of course. Wow, man. You know what really fascinates me is like your generation, you know, kind of embody that if you lived maybe 5 lives, you know, because perhaps back in the day, my parents, my great grandparents, my grandparents, you know, they have a very simple life, let's say, right? And then what you describe, you've been living like many, many lives. So you became an education specialist. But first of all, before we gonna go down to EdTech, education, that you are basically an expert on, why your love for Africa? You know, why? Because someone, as you described, so young, like in a very small town in Scotland, then you just come to London, a big city, metropolitan city, and you, okay, I'm going to study Africa, African culture, and African studies. How did it happen?
So I think on one hand, I think it was maybe like within my soul, that it was just something that I was really drawn towards from like a very, very, very young age. And I think the way that it kind of manifested as a child was probably with that kind of naive, innocent exoticism of something that felt very different to like what I was growing up with, but through the lens of it being different and beautiful, not different and like less value. And I think then as I got older, I also became aware of, colonialism and all the kind of deep injustices that my culture and my country, the UK, has been part of forming. And I remember learning about underdevelopment and just being kind of my mind being blown. Like how is it that we're continuing to profit from our historical exploitation of others, and that now their development is also confined to what best serves us, and so I think then there became also maybe a kind of social justice component of it, where both like my passion and my curiosity combined with a sense of like, oh, I really want to do something to, I know it's a cliche to say, but to give back, I suppose. And then I always loved languages. Again, I grew up somewhere where we didn't really have exposure to many different languages, but it was something I really wish that I had more of in my life. And so when I was applying for university, I saw that at SOAS in London, you could do African studies and an African language. And I thought like, oh, that would just be great to do an African language. And if you wanted to do the year abroad, which I really wanted to do, you had to choose Hausa or Swahili. So I just listened to them on YouTube and I was like, oh, Swahili sounds a bit easy. I'll just go with this one. And yeah, that was sort of my fate sealed, I suppose. And I definitely continue to use Swahili. I'm really grateful that I had such a supportive family who were kind of not bothered about it being linked to a particular career path. But yeah, that's how I ended up doing Swahili.
Wow. That's great, man. You in a way, like it seems so obvious, but this historical relationship, right, in between the sub-Saharan African and some European countries. Intrinsically, we've got this relationship, right? Even though
Yeah,
we haven't actually lived, that
yeah,
era. I mean, it depends on what you believe, right? If you believe in past life or whatever. But it's how beautiful it is, to basically change the perspective and find beauty in something and somewhere that you haven't ever been, right?
yeah,
So that's great. And also, like, I agree with you. I mean, I feel like this kind of historical tension that, in a way still exists, somehow it's kind of, I don't know if you agree with me, but it's self healing. For instance, myself, being Latin American and then, live um, on and off in Spain, in a ways helped me to find kind of a peace of mind, right? Because we have this kind of historical events that, kind of antagonize my people, and then living here and meeting great people, it's very
yeah,
self-healing, right?
yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I suppose it's like if I were on the other side, I would also to some extent challenge that and be like, is this now you kind of trying to feed your ego with altruism, I suppose, which I think is a very valid point. And
Sure.
absolutely, there's a lot of privilege that I experienced being a white person in Tanzania. So I think it's important to be like mindful of that. I guess for me, at the core of it is like, uh, is like practicing an ethical approach in what you do, and part of that also involves like making sure you're sensitive as to whether or not somebody wants you there, not creating dependency, or at least like really trying not to, and also um being mindful that like I I don't have all the answers to like a country like Tanzania's problems, because I'm not Tanzanian. So a lot of those things shouldn't come from me. And like, does it mean that I can contribute? I believe that it does. It like I can contribute, but I think I should continue to be kind of sensitive as to like what form that contribution should take.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. But also, like, not even this kind of like philanthropy, right? And I agree with you. It doesn't matter whether you are doing it because of yourself, because you want to help yourself, or because you want to feel good. Because in reality, and if you materialize this, it's happening, right? Whether or not your intentions, you are transforming other people's life. But
Mm,
also, I was thinking, even go beyond that. Just the simple fact that you are developing meaningful relationships with people, right? That perhaps
yeah.
historically, that also is in a way kind of self-heal yourself, because you
Mm,
truly are, maybe sharing your life, your thoughts, your feelings, your moments, your experiences with someone that perhaps had so far, and maybe in the past, the story wasn't like this. And
yeah.
then you are sharing like something beautiful. So,
Yeah.
one, yeah, of course, helping others and try to this kind of like help this reparation path, which I think is very necessary. But on the other hand, of course, I mean, sometimes it's hard to help because we don't even help ourselves, but just develop such a good relationships, right? With, like, for instance, me with perhaps Spanish people, or, Like even myself with the indigenous tribes in Latin America, have genuine relationship is beautiful. So I understand how you can be fascinated by other culture even though you are not there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the point that you were making about human connection, I also feel like to me that is why like language is so important, and even more important in these contexts where historically there is a, or even now there is a language hierarchy where like the kind of colonial language is still seen as a more prestigious language than the local languages are. And so I think that is both a reason why I feel like in Tanzania I can make perhaps a more unique contribution than I could make elsewhere, because speaking Swahili allows me to really understand different people at a level that I wouldn't be able to if I didn't have the language. And therefore, it also allows me to show like a level of respect that I want to communicate, but that I would be limited in how much I can communicate it in another context. And so I think that is probably like a kind of self-perpetuating thing where my Swahili means that I'm fond of Tanzania because I can foster deeper relationships, but that also makes me then want to stay in Tanzania because that's a place where I feel like I can like nurture those kind of human connections.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So would you say like maybe your experience wouldn't be different as, Swahili spoken person, like if you speak English? So like having this skill like allow you to maybe immerse yourself into this culture because it's a beautiful culture, right?
Yeah, I think so. I would say twofold. Like it allows me to access another layer of culture
Sure.
that I otherwise wouldn't be able to access, but also it allows me to communicate something which is important for me to communicate, which is respect for another culture. Like there have been some meetings I've been in before where one person cannot speak Swahili in the room and therefore everybody is speaking English. And for some people, even people within government, it can be really hard for them to effectively communicate themselves in English. And then it begs the question, like, who are we really here to serve? Like, it's almost like a way of asking people again to like meet the requirements of the organization or the country that is providing the funds, and kind of you have to communicate to us on this in this language because this is what we want, as opposed to like we're invested in understanding your needs in the best way that you can communicate them, and that might be your own language, and maybe that requires like a translator, for example, or an interpreter. So I think that it's both about that like cultural human interaction, and then also about like respect and showing commitment to really like wanting to understand people's needs if you say that that is what you're there to serve.
Well, that's an excellent point, right? You never know because in reality, like you're supposed to serve the community that you are intended to transform. But, operationally speaking, you have to operate, in the structure and the organization and perhaps the language of the donor, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
often I think that's the case.
And also, like if you go to Tanzania, they're definitely bilingual, right? They speak both languages.
You mean the Tanzanian
English,
people?
yeah, in general, right?
Well, in theory, yes, but like compared to some, for example, in Kenya, I think the let's say the standard Swahili is maybe not to the same degree as it is in Swahili, but then the English is, I think, more widely spoken and
Okay.
to a higher level. So I think it's although officially yes, both languages are spoken, people's confidence in speaking English is, I think, a lot lower than you might think, given that it's an official language. And I think confidence is key there, because I don't want to say, I've measured everybody's English abilities, but if you're talking about your needs, then whether you feel confident is really important.
Yeah, sure. No, it's because, I basically, this is what I observed navigating in Tanzania, but of course, I didn't navigate, like properly, right? I went to the bigger cities, perhaps I moved, when I supposed to be moving because I'm not a local guy. So I suppose in this chain of someone to be a tourist, or maybe someone that who do a little bit of documentary work or whatever, we are kind of saved in this kind of path. But I agree, I mean, not to some extent everybody speaks other language, because I suppose there is a barrier, no? And also, like, it's funny because I remembered being in like these neighbors and the kids, singing these songs about Muzungu, Muzungu.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't wait was that, but no, it's great. It's great. I love it, man. It's true. So then, okay. So Hannah, you love Africa. You had the chance to finally move there, practice your Swahili, immerse in their culture. And then why education, right? Why do you love it so much? Because eventually you become an expert in education.
Yeah, so education really came about because, as I said, so when I moved then to Dar es Salaam, I started as a volunteer intern at Ubongo, making these educational cartoons and radio shows. And I love, to this day, I think Ubongo is an awesome organization. I think it is really like addressing a really acute need, which is like for quality learning content that is widely accessible, that is Afrocentric, and that is good quality educational material that kids love. Kids really enjoy it. So I really liked making those products, and I ended up kind of overseeing the educational component. So like the curriculum development, the development of scripts, of the learning objectives. And so one of the reasons was I just didn't feel like, I felt like it was something I really wanted to be able to do well, but I didn't feel like I had the knowledge and skills to do so. And I always feel uncomfortable too heavily relying on the opinions of others. Like, I think getting outside opinions is really important. And there's so many people who have far greater expertise than me, but I want to be able to approach those critically, and make sense of them a little bit myself. And I didn't feel like I had that skill set. But the other reason, and possibly like a bigger reason, is that in the office, one of my colleagues, she had a little baby that was, I think, 6 months old when I started. And so as you know, I was building my career at Ubongo, this little baby was like growing up, learning to walk, learning to hold a pen, learning to speak. And she took a shine to me, and I also took a shine to her. And so this little baby would come and sit with me. And I used to always worry that people were going to say in my kind of 360 review, like, Hannah spends too much time playing with the kids and not enough time doing her work. But I just found it fascinating, like watching her interact with the content we were making, writing a song and then seeing, does she like the song? Does it make her want to dance? And seeing her learn to paint my toenails under the desk with like a marker pen, and not even being annoyed that it might be permanent marker, being like, wow, she's managed to just do my toenails and not the rest of my foot. So she's really learning something about like control and those fine motor skills. And so, yeah, seeing her learn and develop was what then made me really want to pursue like a master's in education and child development, because I felt like this is so interesting and I want to know more about what good practice is and how we can do the best we can with what is available in this kind of context. And to this day, she is still one of my best friends. She's now almost 10. And I mentioned just before we started recording that I'm going to Zanzibar tomorrow, but she's the one that I'm taking
Oh,
to Zanzibar, her
wow.
and her cousin. So we like it's really amazing to watch this girl grow and now have, completely her own personality. And I'm filled with like gratitude because like she is a huge part of why I'm still in Tanzania and also why I'm like committed to this sector of education. So yeah, that's also a big reason.
Wow, that's so beautiful. So would you say, because it's amazing, I think you're pointing something out, which I agree with. Like basically the fact to stimulate the kids at early age is so valuable, right? I mean,
Oh yeah,
you kind of like can make a massive difference if at early age children are exposed to, the proper stimuli that
yeah,
they should be, right? So would you
yeah.
say, like, what age would you say, as an education specialist, is the proper age to start to stimulate children, you know, in anything, basically?
I think they always say the first 1,000 days, but really, like the earlier the better, and the type of stimuli changes depending how old they are. So with very small babies it can be just responding to the sounds they make, like reacting to where their eyes are drawn to, and commenting on those things so that you help them to develop those language skills. But it's really interesting because I think different cultures value different things in when it comes to what they consider to be like an educated child. And one of the things that I think there was a study of different qualities, kind of life skill qualities that parents value in children in Tanzania, and like discipline and obedience come out on top. And I think what's really key is that when I like to think of it as like pruning rather than like molding something, because if you mold something you're kind of restricting the way that it grows. And I think with children, like it's better for them to grow fully and then to help them trim back and refine the things that will help them do better in life. So, for example, it's much better to have confidence and then to learn how to communicate your confidence appropriately in the context you're in than it is to, make a child feel self-conscious or afraid to share their opinion or to offer an answer. And then later in life, you're really trying to coax that out of them. Um, so yeah, I think you want to be stimulating these things. I mean, your parents, I'm sure you know, and I'm sure you did it with your own children, like from the
Try.
moment they're born, if not before when they're in the womb. But I think it it can be challenging when some social norms around like what a good quote unquote child looks like. Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons why education has to take a holistic approach. You can't ignore the influence of parents, of the neighborhood, of the teacher, of the broader culture on the child themselves.
Wow. Yeah, I agree. And also in my experience, I mean, we try to, yeah, like stimulate the children with, our experiences within our limits, right? Because, but also I've learned throughout these years how important it is, but not only like in terms of, I mean, not only in terms of like education as teaching skills or maybe topics or whatever, but also psychologically speaking, right? Because from 0 to 6, according to psychologists, is so important to also nurture them with good values, with love, things
Yeah,
like
of
that. But
course,
also,
of
like,
course.
this is also education, right? So I
Yeah.
have two questions. So basically, you talked about you rather use uh, like other word than molding, okay? And secondly, I would love to hear your experience about maybe Tanzanian approach to education, which I suppose is broad, but in general. So the first one, what is the other approach
Ah,
than molding? I love it. I just miss the word.
so I mean, it was something that I was just discussing with a friend about children. She also works in education, and we were using the word prune because you know, pruning is what you do to like a plant that is maybe overgrown, but before you can prune it, it has to really have like grown. And what you're pruning is to try and help it grow even better and in the right ways. And like, I think to me, it has a notion of like letting something fill its own space, you know, become what it is going to be, develop a child's own personality, and then help them like figure out how they can use their personality to fulfill their potential in society. And what you don't want to do is kind of crush people's sense of self, or to make people who don't feel unique, you know, don't feel like they have anything unique to offer. So you really want to foster that uniqueness of every child. But it is also the responsibility of educators to help children grow to be able to navigate society. And, you know, particularly if you're in a society, I can give the example of Tanzania, but I think it is true of a lot of places where there are, you know, values of respect for elders. There are duties that children are expected to perform, whether that's running errands, etc. And it's really important that you are helping children to navigate the society that they live in. And actually, it's one of the things that we see. I think we're seeing more now with EdTech, given that this is particularly the sector that I'm now working in, is this kind of like almost a kind of new type of colonization where there's a lot of Western values around like education and what it is to be a successful individual, perhaps even individualism, that are then kind of projected onto countries like Tanzania through technology and edtech. And so I think that the point I suppose I'm trying to make is just that, like, when we're pruning, we're trying to help the full whole child have the skills they need to navigate their own society. But the notion of growth that comes first is really allowing that person to, like, that child to be who they're meant to be.
Wow, I love it, pruning. Yeah, that's why I asked you that. But then it's
Yeah.
perfect because you just mentioned something and bring something to the table, which is very important, which is like, okay, how education has been, in a way, imported, you know,
Yeah.
even in different cultures, let's say
Yeah.
global south. So that's why I want to ask about the educational approach or the education approach from the Tanzanian perspective, because Tanzania is a very special place, with President Nyerere, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
the Uyama villages, and also like,
Ujamaa, yeah.
yeah, sorry, I mean, my Swahili is excellent. And then, this concept of how we can bring all the country together despite our ethnicities, which is one of the biggest challenges in some of the African countries, right? Even right
Mm,
now. So I was
mm.
wondering, how do you see like a native Tanzanian conceive education or how they educate themselves, especially those who haven't got access to this kind of imported version of education, right?
Mm, mm. So, you know, the education system, I think the government have done a lot to design a curriculum that aligns with its values.
Okay.
So things like the importance of community are very much in the curriculum. Things to do with like history of Tanzania, of what it is to be a Tanzanian, are in the curriculum in the civic and moral studies subject. And the children, for example, in primary school learn about the local government structures, etc., which are representative of how their society runs. I think one of the challenges that the Tanzanian system faces, and this I think is also true of a lot of other low and middle income countries, is that the curricula tend to be competence-based curricula. So there's a shift towards a greater emphasis on being able to apply your knowledge and skills in real life contexts, rather than just cramming a lot of knowledge in. However, the exams remain very much knowledge based. So what that means in practice is just that the curriculum might be very well designed to serve the needs of the country, but the way that it ends up being delivered is really like cramming in a lot of facts and needing to know things like word for word how they're written in the textbook, and that being how you're graded. And I think that like the assessment approach, while I do understand that it's extremely challenging to effectively assess and sort of benchmark students on a national level, I think that's a challenge we face because society also wants us to have a grade. It wants a way of determining who is the best, who is second best, etc. So
Wow.
that leads to us having these scored approaches as a proxy for what we're able to do. But the challenge is then that even if you have a curriculum which is emphasizing like values, what can end up happening is that the way that it is taught is just, can you recite this value word for word, rather than can you actually practice this value.
Wow, that's why, reading your work and the stuff that you've been doing, that's why you focus on context driven solutions, right? Which is so important,
Yeah,
because basically how we can basically like assess, evaluate, and even deliver education depending on, you know, the actual region or context that you are, right?
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Wow, that's a big challenge. So, do you think like still, a normal Tanzanian family, they value education and they see it as an investment, or education is something which is embedded in the values, and education goes beyond curricula, and perhaps is this kind of transference, or in between, yeah, transfer like the eldest knowledge onto the youngest ones. You see what I'm saying?
So I think, and I'll be interested to hear if you feel like the same has happened, for example, in Colombia. But in, let's say, like 20, 30 years ago, when education was still required payment of fees, because parents are then investing in fees, they're also investing in like, well, I want to know if I got my money's worth. So like if I'm paying for my child's education, I want to know like that my child is not absent from school. I want to know what their results are. If their results are low, I want to find out, why is my child not doing well? And so it's, from a moral perspective, it is absolutely correct that every child has a right to education, as is in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that is absolutely right. But it did create a challenge, because then the perception of many people, and I would argue that this is not unique to Tanzania, the perception of parents was then that if they don't have to pay fees, it's the government's responsibility and it is the teacher's responsibility to educate their child. And so for a lot of people, they then took a step back from being actively engaged in their child's learning because it no longer was a cost to them. Now, like, that is not to say that it is the wrong thing to implement fee-free education, but rather that requires another type of kind of awareness campaign around what does this mean for you as a parent. It doesn't mean, yes, now it means that there's access to education for even those who were previously unable to pay, but it doesn't mean that those who were able to pay and now are not paying, that they don't need to follow up on their child's education.
Of course.
And so I don't know if that's something that you or perhaps like your parents ever observed in Colombia, but I think that's something where I would say over the last like 10 years, there's also been a lot of interventions in the kind of international development community to help the government raise awareness among parents and communities of the importance of education. And a lot of that is because people felt that if government were funding it, it is not their responsibility anymore to follow up on. And there is a change, I would say, taking place. And what we're seeing now is that it is extending to the years of education which are being newly introduced to basic education in a kind of formal sense. So pre-primary education and like upper secondary education. Now that those are becoming fee-free, there's also needs to be additional awareness created around like the importance of pre-primary education and how much of that also needs to be complemented by the parents' own engagement in the home. I think I would say that Tanzania also has a lot of private schools, many of which are not especially expensive. I mean, maybe for someone who is earning like a day salary, it would be too expensive. But even people who are doing like motorcycle taxis, for example, can afford some of the lower cost private schools. And I think that the fact that such a big network of private schools exists is testament to the fact that people do value education and they want their children to learn. I think often they just don't know the best ways to support their education. And so it is either just enrolling them in a school or it is paying for the school. But oftentimes it is not a lot else beyond that. And maybe that's because of limited awareness, limited knowledge, limited skills, perhaps even, you know, parents who themselves don't have an education. It can be really difficult for them to have the ability, but also the confidence to help their child with homework. And I don't know if you've seen anything similar in Latin America.
Sure. I mean, we have also like facing similar challenges. And actually, I'm going to recommend you, a pedagogy that was developed especially in Colombia by a group of scholars. One of them, which I'm actually going to do a podcast with, is called like New School. So they were basically adapting education in the rural areas. It's very unique. But I want to ask you, so basically you have private education, public education. This is the two dimensions,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then, I don't know, I mean, I suppose you can actually measure that up. I mean, in terms of the quality and the level, I suppose by, national exams, right? So is it a huge gap in between public education performance and private education performance? There is a gap or not really, or is, I don't know.
Yeah, there is a gap. I mean, it's difficult to say that there definitely is a gap. I think one of the things that is really hard is, as I said, like the exams are very much knowledge based. And so
Okay.
as a result, even in the private schools, especially in the years that sit exams, there is a lot of emphasis on just doing past papers and kind of rote memorization almost of what is going to be in the exam. So whether or not you can really say better grades equals a better like quality of education is maybe
Okay.
like another question. But certainly because there is then in society so much emphasis on your grade, like it does matter. Like it matters if you get an A versus like an E. And absolutely the private schools do tend to outperform the public schools. I mean, public schools, for example, are often overcrowded, understaffed, lacking in resources. There's been a massive push recently by Tanzanian Institute of Education to make sure that there's one textbook for every child. But the fact that that has had to be a push is indicative of that it hasn't always been the case.
Sure.
And yeah, so I think that public schools do have a really difficult time in delivering quality education, and compared to private schools, I would say, are therefore forced even more to make sure the students memorize everything. Because you know, if high stakes exams is the indicator of your success and you're a teacher and this is what's going to say whether you've done a good job or not, you're really not going to waste time in trying to see whether or not children can apply these skills in real life context. You're just going to be worried about, are they going to get this question right in the exam? And
Sure.
so, you know, and especially if your children in the class don't all have textbooks, you are going to be getting them to just repeat after you. So it's a challenging one, I think. And I
No,
don't think
sure.
it's like, I don't think it's necessarily a reflection on teachers'
Yeah, I get
innate
it.
abilities, but often on the broader
Yeah,
context. Yeah.
definitely. No, no, but
Yeah.
also like it's something that, from my perspective, and I definitely there are a lot of studies who can back this up. It also happens in Europe, you know.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
in a lot of European countries, definitely private schools they outperform the public ones. You know, not to say Latin America, some places in Asia, right? That's for
Yeah.
sure. Even in
Yeah.
America, you know,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
US and North and Canada is
Yeah.
exactly the same. But also, I think you touched upon a very important point, which is basically the role of we as parents in this process of learning. You know, delegating to the state. Oh, okay, it's important, so you are in charge of them because
Yeah.
then they will be part of you and they're gonna
Yeah.
contribute to you and so on and so forth. But also, like that's so true because look at
Yeah.
Asian children, right? You can see, like for instance, okay, public schools maybe in places like Malaysia or Indonesia, perhaps to some extent they have different resources as the private ones, but also the role of parents, educating the children at home, help them to be more competitive.
Yeah.
The market, right?
Yeah, and I think you know, if we say the goal of education, I mean, the philosopher, what's his name? John Dewey, is it? He said that, you know, purpose of education is to help children navigate their society and thrive in society. And so you're only in school for a limited number of hours per day. If you can't apply the things you're learning at home in real life context, then are you really learning? Or to you, does learning just look like doing maths because it's on the page in the book in number form? Or does it look like, you know, applying those skills to real life context? And it's actually one of the things that Ubongo does really well with its cartoons and radio shows is try to find real life examples, circumstances when children really would apply these skills and help walk them through that process of like solving the problem and it being driven by problem solving, and the fact that that strategy of problem solving is called algebra or called an equation is like secondary to the process of solving the problem. And I think that that's a way in which the home life plays a massive role, is, you know, helping children, encouraging children to apply the things they're learning at school, allowing them to make mistakes, fostering a sense of security and safety around failure, you know, nurturing curiosity, welcoming questions. And I think a lot of those things they sound easy when put like that, but they're actually often feel burdensome for a parent who is illiterate, who works a lot, who doesn't have anyone to help at home. So it's often not as simple as we might think it is, but that is not to say that there isn't something that every parent could be doing at home which would have a positive impact on their child's learning.
Sure,
Yeah.
I agree. I want to ask you, what do you think about this kind of like Montessori or perhaps Waldorf approaches, right? Because, you know, as a parent, I have the same concerns as we just put it in the table, right? Okay, do I want my kid to be evaluated and be nurtured in this kind of system where the best is the one who gets the best grades, and, you know, maybe, you know, constraining their natural development in other areas that perhaps they are more difficult to assess, like social skills, you know, kinetic in terms of sports, you know. So I have my kids at Montessori school, right? So I was asking you as an education specialist, because when you describe, you know, like a good process, right, to nurture kids, especially at early ages, to perhaps find their own potential, it sounds for me like a Montessori approach.
Yeah.
So what do you think about these kind of alternatives?
I think, you know, there's so much research to support them, and that's why they have garnered so much popularity as well. And I think that they're great approaches. And I think that one of the main things, for example, with Montessori learning, is like the hands-on approach, like the practical application of what you're learning. And there's a lot of elements of that should and can be taken to even like a Tanzanian public school. I don't think let's say, the type of Montessori schools or schools where there's, let's say, like no assessment. I don't think that works on like a national scale, because
No, it's too
at some
expensive.
point, yeah, exactly. And like if I were running the national education department, I would be like, well, at some point I'm going to have to like measure the quality of education. How am I going to know if children have learned anything if every child is being like very subjectively assessed? And I don't think that it is right to put unnecessary emphasis on high stakes summative assessment, but I do think that we have to like find the best ways of assessing education on national levels, even for the sake of accountability for government. So yeah, I think for those who can afford it, who have access to it, I think a lot of approaches, it also depends on the individual child. You know, there's people who say, I wouldn't do this with my child, but you don't know your child yet. And then when you have a child, you're like, oh, actually, my child is incredibly curious, so I really want to nurture that part of them, versus another child who's maybe like very studious and responds well to like kind of the typical lecture style teaching. I think universally children learn well through play. They learn when they're enjoying, because they're not stressed, they're you know, curious, they're motivated. But what play looks like varies from child to child. So, you cannot say that, like a team game feels playful for all children. For a very shy child who's very anxious in those settings, like, it actually might not feel really fun. So some of the
Yeah.
benefits, it doesn't mean it's not beneficial, but some of the benefits and what we describe as like play-based learning, that might not actually be what play looks like for that child. So I think that's why I would say, if the more a school is able to respond to the child's needs and like nurture their individual potential, the better. It's just that in state school structures, you're trying to do as good a job as you can for every child, and therefore some things just won't be able to happen to the same extent or to the same like quality level as they can in private education.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point, actually, about like the perspective of playing, right? I mean, team playing for someone who is shy, that
Yeah,
as
I
it's,
hate
it's I
team
know.
games. I
No, no,
I
no,
don't
no.
play like any team sports, and I think it's because I'm so anxious about letting everyone down. So it doesn't feel fun to me. And I recognize that I also, am privileged by the fact that I am self-motivated and learn well in the traditional like way that we were taught in the UK. So I came through that system with relative ease. But for somebody else who learns through different styles, that could have been like a really challenging environment for them. Um,
Sure.
yeah, yeah. And again,
Wow.
that's one of the important things, is that every child is different as well. So
But that's so true,
yeah.
because I was even thinking now, okay, let me think about a team-based play game that it doesn't involve competition among the team players,
Mm,
right? Even if you
mm,
collaborate, to resolve some, I don't know, like some challenges must have to stand out. I think.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
I don't imagine. So imagine if you don't, because at early age it's really hard to handle losing, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
feeling down is so hard. I can see it with my
yeah,
kids, you know,
yeah,
like,
of course.
and also like this level of anxiety is so hard for them. And sometimes I just question myself, because sometimes with my oldest one, like, I actually like put him in the position that I always beat him. but also like, but also I'm thinking, man, maybe I'm not helping to his self-esteem, but I want to also teach him like, it's okay to lose, because I don't know, it's hard.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
agree. I really like this point about, that playing is good to learn because you feel good, but what kind of games you are putting into
yeah.
to on board, right? Okay,
And that's
listen.
actually, sorry, just to add to
No,
that
no,
point,
please,
like, it's
please go ahead.
actually one of the things that with learning through play is really interesting about the way that that has been introduced to different cultures, because also for parents, they might not see that something is a child playing. And so around the communication strategy of introducing like learning through play or play-based learning approaches to parents is like getting them to see that something they might typically characterize as annoying is actually the child learning through play, and helping them to understand how they can kind of steer the child towards playing in a way that is maybe less dangerous or like, yeah, less annoying. Like, if they're playing with something they shouldn't, could you give them another thing to play with instead of your car keys, for example?
Yeah,
And so it's really interesting to see how you go about helping parents in different cultures understand what play
you
looks
got
like.
it.
And a lot of parents also feel self-conscious playing with their child. They feel like people will make fun of them and they look silly, so they're reluctant to be the one that like gets down on their hands and knees and plays in the dirt with the child, because they're embarrassed by it. So yeah, it's a really interesting one, and that's something where we know that play-based learning is a really effective method for children. But how we go about introducing that has to be context driven.
That's so interesting. Also, like education, I mean, it's like a holistic approach, right? When you educate the children, in a way, you also have to educate their parents, but also how
Yeah.
much, you want to be willing to be educated to help your kids. Because even in my small community at school, my kids' school, they offered a lot of like workshop for the parents
Oh,
to
wow.
see how they work. And there are a lot of parents that they missing that. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh no, you guys, from my perspective, with no judgment, we are missing a great opportunity to maybe learn some tools in
Yeah.
order to apply to our kid.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, this is like an universal topic. But I just wanted to contextualize
Yeah, sure.
about education. Of course, you have experience in Tanzania. Definitely, there is a lot of similarities. Anybody who listen to this, they're gonna see it's the same in my country. I'm in the US or I'm in the UK or
Yeah.
Germany. It's kind of similar. But then appears EdTech. Okay. So, very simply, how would you define EdTech? What it is, right? And yeah.
Mhm. So edtech, you mean like what is edtech, or do you mean the place that I'm working
No, 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 no. What it means,
is
the
edtech?
concept.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So edtech is basically technology for educational purposes. Let's call it that. Yeah. So it could be
Fantastic.
designed for educational purposes, or it could be leveraging technology for educational purposes.
Fantastic. Now, this is like the next topic, which for me is very interesting because look, anyway and anywhere, like education is challenged.
Yeah.
It seems that not progressing and evolving as other things in life, if you think so. Maybe like,
Yeah.
I don't know in the Tanzanian context, but definitely in our context, I think my kids, not because they are in Montessori, but some kids I know in a public school, pretty much they learn the same way I did. And pretty much the same like my parents did,
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to do that. But so, technology, from your perspective, do you think would help to improve the existing system?
I think a key thing you said there is to improve the system.
Yeah.
So I think EdTech can definitely improve education systems. I think the key thing is that it cannot solve all of education's problems, all of a system's problems. And therefore, you need to be strategic about where you're using it and why you are using it. So you need to know what exactly is the problem that I'm trying to solve with EdTech. And the organization that I work for now, EdTech Hub, that's kind of at the center of what we do. We try to work with governments to generate and apply evidence on how technology can be used in their education systems for good. And so I think that, there's a lot of different perceptions of EdTech. And therefore, there's a lot of different ways that EdTech can be applied in education systems, and with the impact of that varying to different extents. So a lot of people, when we think of EdTech, we think of like a tablet, and we think of one tablet per student, and they're doing some kind of personalized learning, and that's what we think EdTech is. But EdTech can also be a radio program that is broadcast. EdTech can also be like SMS notifications that remind a parent to follow up on their child's homework. EdTech can also be like at a systems level. It can also be the use of different technologies, whether those are phones, tablets, etc., to gather data, collate data, visualize data to help decision makers. So when we talk about technology for education systems, I would say that there absolutely is a place for it. It is not going to look the same everywhere, because technology should always be like, it works best when it's addressing a real need, like a real problem. And sometimes we use it to address like problems that either are not the most urgent issue, or not the right problem to solve with technology.
I love it. Thank you for clarifying that. It's true. I mean, we have the tendency to think edtech, tablet, gaming,
Yeah, exactly.
gamification,
Yeah,
games,
exactly.
and then maybe everything digital, nothing in
Exactly.
paper. But I
Exactly.
love the fact that you actually spread out the spectrum and you say, listen, edtech, how many layers? Hence, it's very important to see it from this practical way. So, just a little challenge, okay, if you can take it. So let's imagine, because you are an expert in it, edtech in pedagogy, edtech for the teachers, edtech for the children, and then edtech for the actual institution or organization. Can you perhaps just maybe any example, like a proper example, not proper, but some example that might, help us to clarify how would you kind of embed or implement,
Yeah.
integrate edtech into this
Yeah.
dimension? Maybe I'm missing another important
No,
one.
no, no. I get what you're saying. So,
Yeah.
for example, like technology to enhance like pedagogy, let's say to enhance the delivery of the curriculum. It could even be like a projector and a YouTube video. It could be just using a video to demonstrate something. I mean, in contexts like many sub-Saharan African countries, like classrooms don't have access to, let's say, science lab equipment. So you could show an experiment as a video, and that allows children to like experience that experiment, which they wouldn't otherwise have the equipment to do. So that could be it used to enhance the delivery of the curriculum. Then you have like personalized learning. So that's, I think, what we typically think of when we imagine children with tablets, where they're playing perhaps like an educational software that incorporates some aspects of gamification, and maybe they're working through something like at their own pace, that could often and many times does adapt to their knowledge and skills. So there might be a kind of ability check type game at the beginning, which would like set the level for that child's experience, and then they will maybe have their own login, so it will capture their data, and it might provide some kind of report to the teacher, or it would use that data so that when the child next logs in, it knows the progress that has been made and can continue like moving forward. Then so an example of that, let me say, for context like sub-Saharan Africa would be 1 billion. They make one course, and that has a lot of foundational literacy and numeracy content on it, that can therefore be like paced at the child's ability. So they have a kind of test at the beginning that the child does, and that prevents the need for the child having their own login information, because that, in these contexts, it's really difficult to make sure that every child would have like their own tablet, or they wouldn't be using each other's logins. So having that test allows it to kind of adjust the settings to what the person who's just logged on is their ability. Then you have like EdTech for teachers, let's say. And so that could be, for example, a learning management system, something like Moodle, where they can access content for their own professional development. They might also be accessing like a library of content that they could use in the classroom. So in that sense, EdTech can be used for teachers' professional development, or it can be used as a resource for them to deliver a lesson. So for example, you can have even using AI, for example, to develop lesson plans, that kind of thing. And then at the systems level, you can use technology. So for example, educational management information systems to collate data from across the education system and help make really key high-level decisions. So for example, teacher allocation. So one of the things that EdTech Hub has done is use publicly available data on the Tanzanian education system and visualize that in ways that allow you to see trends in teacher allocation. So to spot which regions or districts have teacher shortages, to look at exam trends, pass rates, to look at dropout. And by looking at those different indicators, you can then make better informed decisions about where additional support or interventions are needed. So, for example, if you look at data on population growth, you'll be able to see, like, does this school or does this district have enough teachers to accommodate the growth in population, which is going to enter in like 2 years' time, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of different purposes for technology in the education system, and that's why I would always emphasize that you need to know what problem you're solving, and is technology the right thing to solve this problem with.
Definitely. And I was even thinking, like, operationally speaking, is so like useful. Like
Yeah,
schools, smaller schools, they have to obviously respond to the clients, which are the parents, integrating an AI, maybe like feature that
yeah,
maybe you answer instantly, or they can
yeah,
filter out all the information is so
yeah,
important.
yeah.
So would you say how far we are in education to actually like integrate edtech efficiently in the classrooms? What do you think? Maybe 10%,
I
or maybe we
I
are,
think
yeah.
so. I think the better question perhaps is like how far we are to doing something sounds like that's the right thing to do, and like how close are we to achieving this goal. But I think what's maybe more important is like what are the barriers to quality education, and like which are the parts that technology could help solve. So because that's the aim, right, is quality education. The aim is not just have computers
Sure.
in the classroom unless they're actually delivering quality education.
Hmm.
um, and I think there in contexts like in Tanzania, there's a lot of like other barriers that we need to overcome. So when we think, for example, of the personalized learning situation with one tablet per child, then I think of classrooms that don't have windows. So like, how are we going to store these tablets? I think of the lack of electricity, or where there is electricity, there's often power surges, so they can really destroy technology. There's a lot of dust, and there's so where I've been, where there have been computer labs, often the keyboards or the mice stop working, need replacement. I think about who's going to maintain this. So who's going to be the I guess what we would call like the IT guy that you call, who's going to come in and fix this thing. It might, if there is someone in the district who can fix that thing, they might not even have fuel for the motorcycle to get to that school. So is that actually like a realistic option? Then I think about data. Who's going to pay for the internet? Is there even like a internet router in the school? If not, how are they going to get data? Where's the budget for that data going to come from? Because we're still actually struggling to, employ enough teachers. So there's just so many things where I think even if you had the tablets, is that really the best use of the money like that school might spend on the tablets? Like, is that really the thing that they should be buying, or should they be looking at like an additional classroom, or should they be looking at a school feeding program so that, children who come to school hungry are actually able to learn. So there's just so many like other challenges. But what I do think technology can and should do is leverage what is already there to try and contribute to the improvement of quality. So what I mean by that is like not necessarily like buying tablets, but okay, almost every teacher has a phone. So what support could we provide to teachers, even via SMS, that would help them do their job better? Is it reminders to do something? Is it like tips based on what we know to be common challenges? So for example, on like how to manage large class sizes, could the tips just be sent out as like SMS messages? And one of the things that we're doing in Tanzania is working with Tanzania Institute of Education on the national, so it's a government-owned learning management system. And one of the things that offers is modules for teachers to do communities of learning at the school. So rather than training teachers in this kind of classic cascade model where you like train the trainer and then the trainer trains other trainers, and then eventually that's kind of dispersed out to the different districts, and the teachers will be trained in the vicinity of their school. But that's really expensive because you have to pay for everybody to get somewhere. And it often isn't that impactful because the content and the quality of that content is diluted down at each level, where somebody is like Chinese whispers, you're passing on the knowledge. And so eventually by the time it gets to the school, people in different parts of the country might be having extremely different training experiences. Whereas providing access to community of learning modules allows at the school level them to kind of be empowered to decide what is the challenge we're facing in our school. Is it about inclusive learning? Is it about gender responsive or gender sensitive pedagogy? Is it about large class sizes? Because some schools don't have large class sizes, so maybe they don't want that training. What they want is they have real challenges with maths and literacy, so they want to focus on guidance around that. And so this learning management system means that teachers can log on, or even one teacher in the school could log on, access that module, and then they can work through it together. And it also allows kind of government to have some quality control over the type of content received at the school level, because they're the ones who create these modules and put them on. And what we've also done with that is added we were talking about the importance of data for decision making. So we've added a data dashboard, which has really like transformed this platform from being essentially like an e-library of content for teacher professional development to now also being a source of monitoring and evaluating what is happening around teacher professional development, because the government can now see like what modules are teachers in this school doing. If they look at pass rates in a region and they see that one subject is really low, they could actually recommend teachers in that region to use a particular module. And you can see like who's logged on, where have they logged on, which modules did they access. So in that respect, like technology is serving a purpose of both providing access to professional development content, but also in doing that, providing a like feedback loop whereby at a national level, those who are responsible for teacher professional development can learn more about what's happening, and can provide like more targeted support where it's needed.
So many good points, So first of all, I want to ask you because for sure it's very expensive. It could be spent in something else. It's contextual. That's why I love the context that you are describing this for, because the needs of a school in the rural Tanzania, it wouldn't be the same as the needs in a rural Italy or
Yeah,
UK,
yeah, yeah.
So how important is to integrate these and put it, and prioritize it upon other needs. But also this kind of lead to my question, based upon your perspective, you know, do you think like if children they are not exposed to technology, right? Maybe in the future they wouldn't catch up with this kind of like evolution because you
Mm,
see what I'm trying to
mm,
say.
mm, mm.
Like
Like
maybe if they never seen a computer, right? Imagine.
yeah.
Then because I was thinking that, okay, I've been exposed to a laptop or a computer when I was in first grade.
Mm, mm,
Imagine if a group of children that are not exposed to
mm,
technology.
mm.
So do you think they wouldn't be able to catch up later? Or I don't
I
know. Sorry, just
think
ignorance.
no, no, no. I think it's a really good question. Like it's like do so should we be incorporating technology for the sake of digital literacy as a skill for the future? Now, I
Exactly.
think that is a really important that's a really important skill for children and teachers alike to have. I think the way that we approach developing that skill, we have to be a bit careful and critical of.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
I I haven't there's a for example, UNESCO has a kind of framework of what like digital literacy looks like. And I think it's really challenging because there are some technologies which are very intuitive, and it's one of the huge benefits to leveraging like a smartphone if you want to create something that um, is as accessible as possible, because
Sure, like
you don't need to then learn how to use a computer because smartphones are designed to be intuitive. Like
yeah, like
the
M-Pesa,
kids,
no? Like
exactly.
having
Yeah.
M-Pesa, but then transform M-Pesa to education.
Yeah.
Anybody can have an access to it. Anybody, yeah, yeah, yeah. So please go ahead, yeah.
Or even thinking about like how many kids can just like figure out how to navigate TikTok or YouTube, like before they can even read or write. And so there's obviously something that is like intuitive about this, about where to press, about what to do. And I
Of
think
course.
computers are not so intuitive. Like that's why we've learned those a bit more than we have just like acquired the digital literacy skills around a smartphone.
So how
I
young,
think
sorry, so how young do you, oh, okay, what age is the best age to be introduced digital literacy?
ooh,
I
so
don't
I
know. I mean,
think
if I
I
suppose it's been studied, right?
yeah, I feel like that's a tricky one because it also depends like where we're talking about. I
Yeah.
think if I were to talk about like the Tanzanian context, I think the purpose, again, as with anything in education, the purpose of introducing this thing is so that they can use this skill in the future. Therefore, we have to have an ear to the ground about what is the future going to look like? What are the things that they need to be able to do? Like there's a lot of things where uh like what people are learning is about where to plug in a USB on the computer. Honestly, to me, that's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. You can pretty much figure that out because it's only going to fit into one slot. So
Of course.
you'll jab around a bit and you'll figure it out. That's not worth spending time like learning that thing. The kind of things that we do need to teach are around like internet safety, are around like the your personal data and how data is shared, perhaps around like emails and like forms of communication, your digital footprint, for example. um, I think that like I mentioned before, kind of the need to decolonize digital literacy. And that really comes from the fact that so much of what our technology looks like is really down to like, a handful of companies. Like the influence of Google or Meta is just massive. And so we also have to think about like what is the purpose of technology for the person in sub-Saharan Africa or the person in like Tajikistan, for example. Um, and and sometimes that purpose might look quite different. So, you know, it's important to learn perhaps to type, for example, but that is also something that you could learn at a later stage if you already had a grasp of like what is the purpose of you typing. It's in order to like send an email. You could also send an email from your phone, and a lot of people learn to type on a phone before they learn to type on a keyboard now. So like I think it's important to know why we're trying to support the development of certain skills, and therefore
Sure.
like which are the skills that need to be developed.
Definitely. I mean, I would see the value, like, you know, enhancing or basically investing in professional development for the teachers, which, at the end, at the heart of education, you know.
Yeah.
But also it's true, like how important it is, technology in certain regions. What's the
But
purpose of it, right?
yeah, and I think that, I mean, even when it comes to teachers, I think that often when when we train teachers in digital literacy, somebody else has designed the digital literacy like curriculum, the syllabus that they're going to deliver, and then they go and deliver it to teachers. And it can include things like the whole Microsoft Office package. But I would argue like narrow that scope and be more human centered in your approach. Like, what are three things that a teacher wants to be able to do that technology could help them do,
I
and
love
equip
it.
them with the skills on that thing? You know, when I think of, for example, Excel, I think Excel is just like a daunting tool unless you actually know what you're going to use it for. Like you learn formula on Excel and you never use them again. And so then you end up, when you do need that formula, you just do it yourself on like a calculator and put in the figure because it's too hard to figure it out again. And the reason that happens is because when you were learning that thing, it wasn't relevant to what you were doing at that time.
Exactly.
Um, and so I think what would be a lot more useful is like, instead of, for example, like training teachers, you know, and if this is their first time with technology, by the way, if someone has their own laptop and stuff, like by all means, you can go beyond this. But if a teacher has never used PowerPoint, there's no point starting with like, this is where you'll get themes from, this is where you'll add this thing from, this is where you're gonna like, you know, change the text box. Why not just give them a template? And the key thing is just input the text and insert picture. Because
Oops.
once they become confident in doing these things, then they become naturally more curious and ready to like further their skills. But if a teacher doesn't have confidence in using the technology for like relevant purposes for them, they just don't use it, because also a teacher is like in that vulnerable position where they're seen as the authority figure in the class or authority on this subject, for example, and then coming in and not knowing what to do, it's kind of undermines their authority, or it can be like, it can feel embarrassing for them. And so
Sure.
one of the main things of equipping teachers with digital literacy is getting them confident to do a handful of things, not getting them like have one time experience of like a whole range of things, and then they'll have no confidence and no like tangible examples of what they'll use it for. So
Yeah.
I would really say that digital literacy needs to be like incremental and needs to be very much rooted in what teachers could actually use it for. And as
Definitely.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, no, I definitely agree. Like, I'm thinking about, okay, what's the purpose to integrate technology if it's not needed, right?
yeah,
I mean, it's supposed to solve issues that they have or they are already, facing. Let's
yeah,
say
exactly.
talking to the parents, because I'm too busy developing new activities. So I've got technology to help me to resolve the issue, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
maybe like what you say, perhaps I want to bring more examples. Okay, I have, an AI who helps me to maybe create or build up this example based upon these subjects and these subjects, and
yeah,
maybe to connect them. No,
yeah,
it's true.
yeah,
I mean, it's how do you use it? But also,
exactly.
do you think, like, of course, you work in a net tech industry, is it too expensive? I mean, I suppose it depends on the needs, but let's say full package, how expensive it is.
Yeah, I think that's a huge barrier to integrating technology, like particularly into public schools or state schools, is that it can be expensive. I think, device maintenance is expensive. Electricity is expensive, like internet is expensive, training or retraining is expensive, employing someone to provide maintenance is expensive. So even if you were to remove the cost of just the device, sustaining that device as like a resource in a school is expensive, and it's often overlooked. People often think about, oh, we're going to provide tablets to this school, but
Mhm.
actually they won't end up getting used because the cost of you upkeep around those tablets is so much that, like, before long, they either don't work anymore, they're sold, or they're just not used because everything else associated is too
Definitely. I
expensive.
mean, you definitely need to hire an IT guy, to do
Yeah.
that. And also, like, definitely your electric bill is gonna be increased,
But
the management, the repairment.
exactly. I think, again, it's one of the reasons why, if you take a context driven approach, you'll think about what is the technology that is most suitable for this context. And often it might be like, what do people already have? Because then you're removing a barrier, because you don't need to get them to find someone to maintain this thing. Because if people already have like quite basic smartphones, that means there's probably ways of maintaining those that aren't too costly.
Of
So, and then
course.
you're also removing the barrier to how do they use these, because they already know how to use them because it's the technology they're already familiar with. So if you can build things that work on the technologies that people already have, you're already like removing one of those barriers to upkeep. And it's one of the reasons, for example, that mobile money like M-Pesa like have been so effective, because they were designed to use what people already had. They weren't
Exactly.
requiring people to buy something to do this. They were saying, well, already this person is one of our customers, so they have a phone. So let's make a way for them to access and send money and receive money easily through their phone. And you can do that with a smartphone, or you can do it with a like non-smartphone. And so I think that's one of the most important things, is really like use the technology that is already available. And then another thing is like partnerships.
Mm.
So like for example, when it comes to the learning management system I was talking about, we're trying to work with the government and the different network providers to have it zero rated across all networks. Because if it's zero rated, then people can access that for free. So, again, one of the reasons that Facebook became so popular, because it's zero rated on so many networks. So it's like a go-to social media, like communication network for people, because it's free. So if you can remove that cost barrier, that's then like another thing that becomes easier. So then, if you were doing a kind of like app-based uh, EdTech initiative, if it works on like a basic smartphone, and then if you had it zero rated across all networks, then what you would be looking at is how many people don't have a smartphone, and where in the country is there no like 3G or 4G, because those would be the limiting factors. And then what you might be able to do is say, for different user types will provide a different type of thing. So, you know, again, as with like mobile money, the way that these features work, so like M-Pesa or Airtel Money or something, the way that these work is different on a smartphone versus a non-smartphone, but they're having access to the same service. So similarly, if you were providing like advice to teachers, the way that it might be on a smartphone could be through an app. The way that it might be on another phone could be through like an audio recording where you like call a certain number and you get to listen to it. And so it's really about saying, okay, what are the different types of users that we're targeting? What do they already have? What can we leverage? If you go in bringing something where you're going to face all the barriers, the barrier to get the device, the barrier to maintain the device, the barrier to have access to data, the barrier to learn how to use the app or the content, then you're really going to have a hard time. And even though you might see results, it wouldn't really be like a very sustainable initiative, because there's nothing about it that is really like rooted in what was already there.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the key, as you put it before, it was M-Pesa, because you can actually understand your target audience, right?
Yeah.
And I think in education, you know, those who work at national level, you know, they're so disconnected to the, you know, to the actual practitioners of education. So when they create these kind of strategies of technology, of integrating EdTech, they don't really know who they are basically like integrating to. They don't know the needs. They don't actually do that. So listen, Hannah, an example, like let's say small school, right?
Yeah.
And anywhere in the world, you know, who is listening to this, you know, and they thinking, oh, you know, am I thinking to perhaps find investment, or I can invest in EdTech for my school? What would you suggest to them? Because, okay, at national level, you know, you can have different strategies and then make it work and so on. But imagine like a small school who's got very like modest budget. What would you suggest to them?
I would suggest a smartphone projector and whatever materials they need to darken a room. So like, even if it's just like fabric that they can stick up over the windows or something. Reason being is that, like, even for children, even for students, like smartphones are much more intuitive, as I said, than a computer. So the likelihood of somebody in the classroom being able to operate like a basic smartphone, and indeed already having one, is much higher. Smartphone projectors are like, can then like broadcast, share whatever is on the phone. So, you know, that allows you to share videos, which again, if you don't have like, if you're wanting to show different parts of the world that your students might not have seen before, if you want to show them experiments that they might not be able to do themselves, if you want to show them like, I don't know, like parts of an engine, for example, like it gives you a way to come close to the experience of hands-on learning by providing audio-visual stimuli that they might not otherwise have. Also, there's like so many games that if you like can make them big enough, are ways of like creating more interactive learning for a classroom. And it builds on a technology that probably a lot of like staff would already have, which would be like a smartphone, and then also like skills that they already have, like going on YouTube, or you know, even just being able to like type something on a phone and show it on a screen. It would make things like using, and this is going a bit further, but like using ChatGPT to create like a quiz. Okay, you can ask ChatGPT or another kind of AI tool, and then you could like show that to all your students at once. So there's just a lot you can do, and I think that it is a lower cost than procuring a laptop or a computer and a projector. It's also much more mobile. You can move it between classrooms much more easily as well. So that's kind of what I would say.
Wow. And also like it helps to the digital divide, right? That we just talked before,
Exactly.
because of course, one of the problems with edtech or educational technology or education technology is the fact that, there is a divide in terms of the digital world, right? So
Totally.
these
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
like strategies it is. My other question is like parents,
Mm.
nowadays, and I can tell you as a parent, there is a trend of demonize technology, right?
Yeah.
Zero tablets, zero mobile phones. I don't want to
Yeah.
see that in my school. If the teachers try to integrate these, I'll be super angry at them. So, you as an education specialist, that, like you also like work with kids, you now work in EdTech. What is the best advice to the parents, especially to maybe suggest them to open their mind,
Mm, mm.
just get away like from these kind of like ghosts or demons that they think they are? Or maybe you agree, maybe technology is not, it couldn't be our friend, but it's more our enemy. So what's your take on that?
I think there's some. So I think I would come from the perspective, and I don't have children, so maybe, ask me in however many years, and then maybe I'll have a different opinion.
Okay, okay.
But I think I would come from the perspective of like, again, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? So if your kids are going to like a well-equipped Montessori school, yeah, what's the need for technology? Like maybe the need for technology is showing them like a nice like educational like edutainment cartoon that has like fun songs that they get to sing along to, and that's like, and that might also support their development or understanding of either like educational like concepts, or it might just be like purely for enjoyment and relaxation. But maybe there's not a need for them to be on a tablet doing like a gamified version of something, because they have enough like resources in their environment to do hands-on learning themselves. When it comes to addition, maybe they actually can like count, I don't know, whether it's like fruits or something like that, that another child in like a resource poor environment might not have. So in that case, the purposes of technology in the school setting might be quite different. Whereas, as I said, like in a low resource context, one of the key ways in which like technology can serve us is by providing like as close to reality as possible, like exposure to things. So that's would be then the problem that edtech is solving. I think when it comes to like um, children's socio-emotional development, like a huge part of thriving in society, in any society, is about your like social emotional competence. And I, as much as some like games on technology can help you like understand some of those skills or like practice some of those skills, it really means very little if you can't apply it to other people. And so you do need to have like human interaction, which can't be replaced by a device. Um, that said, like, is some screen time okay? I think so. I think it's just that the way that a lot of content is designed now is it's designed to be addictive. So it's much easier to draw a hard line and say no phone than it is to be like, okay, phone, but only for this much time. Because then if they're using like addictive apps when they're on the phone, then they're going to have withdrawal symptoms when they're not on it. So I think there was a study that was like children's screen time was associated with like an increase in tantrums and bad behavior, and actually like that falling behind in learning. And so I think that there's a lot of evidence to support less screen time, but I think part of that is because like absent-mindedly scrolling on something is not solving a problem. Whereas showing a child or like children in a school a video of something that is educational, that is like fit for purpose, is solving a problem. So
Yeah.
I think, that's where I would stand on those things. And again, it may be if your child really needed additional support and like maths, a gamification like approach might be quite good, but probably that thing wouldn't be highly addictive, and so you would choose something that where
Yeah, I
they
mean, it
could
just,
manage the stop.
I agree. I agree. I mean, we just like we simplify the process. We just basically blame the technology and blame the tool, but not us who are not able to, maybe manage these tantrums and feelings,
Yeah,
and also it's about balance, like
exactly.
I remembered me and Sarah, remembered Sarah? Like, I remember I have to read like maybe 2 or 3 books about education and digital education in order to debate that is not that bad if we don't take it to the extreme, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But also,
exactly.
I suppose there is a scope for everything. People can think whatever they
Yeah,
want, but also,
yeah.
and we are almost 2 hours. Thanks for that. So
Thank you
maybe
so much.
two more questions. I don't want to
Sure,
steal
sure.
your time. First, like the first one is looking ahead, right? What emerging trends in EdTech excite you the most?
Uh, I would say, so I am really excited about the potential of like machine learning, to help us understand our learners better and help make better decisions. I don't think I would say that that necessarily means like like every child with a tablet, for example, but even being able to understand like the errors that we make and to spot patterns in errors. That's something that often teachers don't have time to do, because teachers are really busy with saying like, do they know this thing, yes or no? But sometimes what we want to look at is, of all the times when they've gotten something wrong, is there any other pattern there? And to do that for every child is like extremely time consuming. But being able to learn more from failure, I think that's something where like machine learning can really help us. On the like opposite side of that, I would say, I'm really excited about what we can do with like low cost basic smartphones. I really think that especially in like lower middle income countries, this is like the biggest opportunity, because as data becomes more affordable, as like the devices themselves become more affordable, then that's going to remove the barrier to like, we need to buy a device in order to get people doing this thing. It will just be, how do we get people doing this thing? How do we get this like teacher training content to teachers? How do we motivate them to want to use the content? How do we help like make it easier for teachers to communicate with parents, like to engage them back in the education system? So I think that I'm also really excited about the potential in there, because I even in Tanzania, I've seen the growth in people with smartphones over the last 10 years that I've been here, and I'm sure that is just going to grow exponentially. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. And the last thing, just to basically wrap up, is, what advice would you give to educators or parents that they want to innovate the learning process to their children, right? Integrating technology, like maybe go to that resource or read the book or maybe find this out, or even the company that you mentioned before that they have different tools. I don't know,
Yeah, yeah.
what would you suggest?
So, as a former Ubongo, I can really recommend their content. I think that's huge credit to Nisha Ligon, co-founder, and Mwasi Wilmore, who's the current CEO, and all the team there. I think they do a tremendous job. And I think particularly for parents across Africa and in the diaspora, but of course the content is like a joy for many like children and parents alike around the world. But I think what they do so well is like both provide children from like pre-primary up to the end of primary with really engaging content that they want to watch, so they're motivated to watch it, and therefore they learn more from it. That doesn't make learning a chore. It makes learning like part of the story that they're telling. And I think for parents and caregivers, there's so much to learn about through watching these, about examples of where children might apply these skills that they would learn at school in real life. They've even released a new series called Nuzo and Namia, which addresses like neurodiversity. So I think there's so much that parents and caregivers can also learn from viewing the content with their children. And I think that, they've won a lot of awards, they continue to grow. And I think that is also a testament to like the quality of the content that they're making. So yeah, I would say like Ubongo is a really great place to start. There's a lot of free content apps, like a lot on YouTube videos. Yeah.
How do you spell that? Ubongo?
Ubongo. It means brain in Swahili.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share it in our description, the link.
Oh, sure. They'll be so
Definitely,
thrilled.
that's wow, Hannah, thank you so much. I mean, we have a lot of topics that we should have touched upon, but I'm pretty sure we're gonna have another episode on this because
Oh, yeah.
there's so many questions, so many things to learn from you because it's good. You have this kind of like technological perspective, but also the educational perspective
Yeah.
in terms of pedagogy, which is great. I'm pretty sure like our audience is gonna be like super excited to learn from you.
I hope so.
Definitely. It's small though, but it's good. It's growing. It's growing gradually. Hannah, thank you so much. It was a
Thank
massive
you.
pleasure. Please,
Thank you
let's keep
too.
in touch.
Yes, please.
And yeah,
Yeah, and say hi to Sarah and your kids as well.
sure. We need to catch up at some point. So
Yeah,
that's
we
great.
should. We should.
Thank you for your time. I know
Okay, take
it's
care.
almost 2 hours.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I know.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, goodbye,
Bye.
everyone.